got just under 25 minutes left in the trading day. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ all holding on to gains. Dow back above 30,000 with all three of the major averages, plus the Russell 2000 on track to close in record territory. And this all coming despite that weaker than expected jobs report that we got out this morning. 245,000 jobs added to the economy in the month of November. But despite these gains and the gains that we've seen over the last several months, there's more than 10 million Americans that remain out of work. And similar, unlike what we've seen in the past here, this recession is making it especially hard for parents and in particular women to work because of the pandemic and all the responsibilities that they have at home. So for more on this, we want to bring in Jamie Ladge. She's a professor of management and organizational development at Northeastern University. And Professor, it's great to have you on the program. I know that you've been collecting data on working parents since the pandemic really hit here in the U.S. back in March. What are some of the trends you're seeing and why women in particular are being forced to leave the workforce?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. So they're calling this the She-cession. You may hear economists use that term quite a bit because women are disproportionately affected by the pandemic for a couple of reasons. One is because they tend to be in industries and occupations that have in-person jobs in service industries, healthcare, education sectors, which have been sectors that have been hit the hardest. And as you mentioned, the shutdowns and reduced capacities at daycare centers this spring, and then we've seen continue through the summer where there was no camps. And now during the school year, which is filled with remote and hybrid learning, it's really created an unprecedented disruption on our childcare system. And this is falling predominantly on women who are tending to shoulder the burden of most of those responsibilities at home.
And I was reading you've actually been studying the data on this since literally the lockdowns began last March. So not only do you have the hard data to show us what's happening, can you help, or is there a way to use this data to help employers bring these women back to work?
Yeah, so we collected data from over 2,500 working parents between Mother's Day and Father's Day. I actually worked with an all-star team at Northeastern. We had an economist and a public policy expert, Alicia Sasser-Modestino, and Elisa Lincoln, who's a mental health expert, and I'm a management and work family expert. So we have all this data covering all of these different factors, and so I can address some of those things. I want to say that one sort of thing that we've been saying all along is that we need to think about childcare as infrastructure. Just in the way we think about our roads and our bridges for commuters as infrastructure, childcare really is infrastructure. We have a third of the U.S. workforce. 50 million workers have children under the age of 14 living at home. This is becoming a real problem for working parents. And it was a problem beforehand, but even harder now because there is so few childcare options. I hear a lot of my colleagues and friends will say, oh, women are opting out. Well, they're not opting out. They're being pushed out because we have so few options for childcare, for daycare.
Yeah, and you say this in your notes here, that childcare, it's not a family issue, it's a business issue. I'm kind of circling back to what Adam just asked, but drilling down more specifically, are there certain steps that companies can take just to help reassure some of their employees who are facing some of these questions or debating whether or not maybe they too should drop out of the workforce at this point?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing that flexibility matters a lot for employers to offer to their employees. Work from home obviously has been essential for a lot of these working families, who have kids now that are home. So I think we have to continue that path forward. And I think employers are going to also have to get creative and step up a little bit more in continuing to offer that flexibility, offering childcare subsidies. But I would say even more importantly, to be supportive of their employees and what the needs are to, in terms of manager support and then coworker support as well, because that's really essential. And you can offer a whole bunch of supports. It doesn't mean that employees are going to take it because there may be fear that if they take it, it's going to have repercussions for their job. But you have to, if you're going to offer that, you have to walk the talk and say, we actually support you taking advantage of these work-life policies.
Jamie, what does the data show among the women who are being forced out? Is it predominantly professional women, or is it women who are working at jobs that aren't considered professional jobs?
Well, this is a nationally represented sample. So across the board, we find that about a quarter of the women, of our entire sample, 1 in 10 working parents reported that they had lost a job or had to reduce their hours solely due to childcare. Women were more affected by this, were more likely to be unemployed or reduce their hours by 25%, or so about a quarter, 1 in 4, compared to men, which was about 13%. So again, and it was because of childcare, but they're also being pushed out for other reasons, as I mentioned, because they happen to be in those industries which were particularly hit hard. Women of color were hit even harder. We saw actually for working parents across the board, it didn't vary by gender, that working parents on average were losing about 8 hours per week due to lack of childcare. And, this is obviously pretty significant in terms of a hit to productivity. And again, women of color were losing even more hours per week on having to care for childcare due to a lack of arrangements.
Jamie Ladge, Professor of Management and Organizational Development at Northeastern University. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Certainly a very, very important topic to discuss.
Thanks for having me.